This is the Blairing Out with Eric Blair show, and today I'm pleased to have John Taylor of Duran Duran on the show, promoting his new book, In the Pleasure Groove, Love, Death, and Duran Duran. How you doing today, John?
I'm good. I'm a happy man.
You've got this amazing book out.
Thanks.
What made you decide it was time?
I lost my dad a couple of years ago, and that causes a lot of introspection, a lot of feelings of nostalgia. I sold the house that I grew up in. I guess I've reached the age where I kind of felt, it was a good time to sort of look back in a balanced way. I got to write about the 80s, which it seems as though, it doesn't happen very often. There are not a lot of books out there that talk about the 80s, which particularly the early 80s, which I think was a really dynamic, really fun time for me. But, for pop culture in general, I think it was an exciting time. And, the timing, the universe aligned. It just seemed like the right time to do it.
Was it painful revisiting some of those memories?
Well, it is painful. I mean, it is. But at the same time, as I say, I think I've got enough, balance today, I suppose, that I could dip into it. I could look at it, but without getting, sucked into it.
Why does a man who is the idol of millions turn to drugs to suppress loneliness?
Well, I think it's trying to be all things to all people, and when you've got a lot of people around you and they all want you to be, somewhat different, then you have to expand on your resume, and you start using, to give you self energy. It's also a late night game, so you're always looking for that extra lift after showtime, so around about 11 o'clock, midnight, you're kind of looking to, shift into overdrive, and that's when you start turning to stimulants.
Did cocaine or drugs fuel the recording of the first two Duran Duran records?
No, not at all. Actually, that was one thing I did find right away, that it never helped me as a player or as an artist. I mean, all logic went out of the window. I think that's why I liked it, because it was, we were under a lot of pressure to deliver, right out of the gate. We had to produce hits, and I think that getting high for me was turning off, no, it never. We were never that kind of a band, and the music was never, created in that way. It was we've always worked in a fairly sober way.
So there was a discipline to, this is time to work, this is time to play.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was the bass player. I am the bass player, and I learned quite early on. Like the bass, you tend to get it recorded and you got quite quickly. Mm-hmm. I mean, those first couple of albums. I mean, the bass. On the Rio album, I probably cut the bass in maybe 2-3 days, and then you've got a lot of time of hanging around while Simon cuts the vocals, Nick cuts the keyboards, and you got a lot of time on your hands. Time on your hands is, that's what the devil, that's what the devil likes.
But musically and sonically, your bass playing on that album is legendary. And you don't know how many times people have tried to learn how to play Rio. I mean, now they can go on YouTube, but back in the day, forget it. How did you come up with those bass lines?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because there was one song on the third album, when we were putting the reunion tour together, there was one song on the third album that I really wanted to put into the show, and I could not for the life of me figure out what it was. And I listening over and over to the album, I couldn't figure out what I was playing, and I must have mentioned it. I mentioned it in some publicly, and right away this kid out there, this bass player, put a tutorial together, posted it on YouTube, and then mailed me the link. Hey John, this is it. I've figured it out for you. I was like, that little bastard. I think when you're, I came of age late 70s. That's when I started playing bass. My bass idols were Bernard from Chic. I mean, I loved his playing. George Murray, who played in Bowie's band on Station to Station and Low. I mean, everything he played was funky. I liked a lot of the disco. I mean, I like disco music. I was a punk, but I like disco, and I like disco for the sound of the bass lines. And I found I could sort of play a rough approximation of sort of disco bass. Funky punk, that's what we were calling it.
How do you feel your definition of glamour has changed over the years?
Well, I suppose it's, I don't know really. I mean, I suppose you get caught up in money, don't you? You know, like turn of the decade. You know, at the end of the 70s. You know, Duran Duran. We were like part of this scene in Birmingham, the new romantic scene. You know, it was a very, very glamorous scene. I mean, everybody put a lot into their appearance. Everybody thought a lot about their persona, their identity, but nobody had a pot to piss in. You know, I think you come to America. You know, you start moving up the social ladder. You know, as you get success, and suddenly glamour becomes about money and wealth, and that's that's the fallacy, I suppose, in a way, that it doesn't have to happen. I mean, right here on Hollywood Boulevard. I mean, actually, in the sleaziest way, there's a tremendous glamour to the sleaze. You know, actually, that's my favorite kind of glamour, quite honestly. You know.
How would you define that?
Well, I suppose it's a sense of uniqueness that one carries. You know, where you're not you don't want to be one of the crowd. You know, you're prepared to develop your identity to a point where you're not out of the cookie cutter. You know, and whatever it is, you use your taste to define yourself, which is style, I suppose. I mean, a lot of people, they could care less about style. It's not important to them. You know, to them, good grades important. You know what I mean? But I think glamour is driven by those who do not want to look like anybody else, do not want to talk like anybody else, or think like anybody else.
Speaking of glamour, how awesome is it for you to see your daughter, Atlanta, celebrated in the pages of Teen Vogue magazine?
Yeah, she's a glamorous girl. Where is she? She should be here. Yeah, she's got the look, and actually everything I was just describing is important to her. You know, if only grades were as important to her as an interesting look were. But now she's out of school. That's okay. But yeah, I mean, she's, a lot of the people around her, like her mother, her stepmom, we're kind of into clothes. We're into, So
your wife Gela was co-creator of Juicy Couture, which is amazing.
Yeah, and now she has her new line, Sky's Taylor, and she's in it, doing it, redefining it, and that's exciting to watch. She's very inspiring to me.
How do you stay monogamous?
Easily. I mean, I've got too much at stake. I find that the marriage. Now I've actually got one. It took me a long time. To get to that place where I had that, and it was something that I wanted for its own sake, and now I've got it. I want to hold on to it. It's like amassing every day. Every day that you work through some bit of bullshit, it's like money in the bank. It's like building up a bank account, which hopefully you'll cash in later life when nobody else is interested in you. You've just got one person in your life, and you're kind of, and you're sworn to each other. I mean, that's the payoff, isn't it? That's the great investment of marriage, I suppose. But we have a great time together, and we inspire each other. And she's like my best friend, a sister. She's all things.
What was what was fascinating about Duran Duran's performance at Live Aid? Earlier in the day, Power Station performed, but it was almost like, here, you and Andy are these two rock and roll looking dudes that day, and then you have Simon and Nick and Roger looking very dapper and very Roxy Music-ish. How was that? What was that experience like for you?
Well, I mean, it was a high point for us in many ways, but it was the point at which the band was the most divided, and we'd kind of come to this point where there were two houses. There was Simon and Nick, there was John and Andy. And there was we weren't really agreeing on the direction of the band, and we just kind of limped into Philadelphia. Really, we kind of came back together. Andy and I were on the road with Power Station. Simon and Nick were working with Roger in Paris, and we kind of came back together for that one day and gave that Live Aid performance. And then we fell apart, and we weren't, we didn't get together again for 17, 18 years.
One of the things you've mentioned in the book is that, and Nick is a dear, beloved friend of yours from childhood, is that what kind of drew a wedge between you and Nick was that Andy Taylor was easier to play and do drugs with, and Nick was not having it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, relationships evolve over time, don't they? I mean, yeah, Nick and I started out, we were definitely it was our ambition. We had a very shared vision. We were both very ambitious. And actually, it's come around in full circle. I mean, Nick is still the most driven person I know. And, he's the one that cracks the whip, on all of us. I mean, he's very, very creative. I mean, he's a pure artist. Everything he does, he thinks in artistic terms, and that's inspiring and frustrating to have around. But it's part of the great chemistry of the band. And Andy's not with us anymore, but still, the four of us that still remain, there's a very strong chemistry. It's all about chemistry. The book's all about chemistry.
Mm-hmm. And then what made Tom Sykes the right man to co-write this book with you?
Well, thank God. I mean, Tom, I mentioned in my thanks to him, I mean, Tom held the flashlight steady when we went into the attic of my mind, and he never let me get bogged down. You mentioned earlier, how can you talk about this stuff without getting, bogged down, or I forget however you put it, but Tom we never got stuck. We never got hung up. We kept moving. We'd set ourselves a target. I feel it's important when you do something like this. I could see a dozen times throughout the writing of the book where I could have got hung up. I could have stayed in bed and not gone back to the page, not gone back to work. And Tom just kept it moving, and he's very upbeat guy, and we have a very good understanding of each other, and I couldn't have imagined doing it with anybody else.
Do they know it's Christmas? What was that experience of because it seems so epic when they show the video starts off and you guys are all arriving, and I mean, it's some of the most powerful players in British music at the time.
Well, it was an epic day, no doubt. I mean, none of us really knew. We all loved Bob, and it was our love for Bob really that got us there. I mean, Bob, he had been touched by the footage that he'd seen in Ethiopia, and he believed he could make a difference. And it was like, in a way, it was like Bob's. It was Bob's thing, we were like, you're doing Bob's thing, yeah, we're going to go and do Bob's thing, and everybody and once we all got there, of course, there's, U2 and Spandau Ballet, and it was a who's who of British music at that time, and everybody was there, and it was like, holy shit, and I think by 7:00 I was back home that day, and it was the TV was just filled with it, and it was created a major shift in the zeitgeist. When people talk to me about the 80s, I said, well, are you talking about before Live Aid or after Live Aid? Because actually there was a change, and the second half of the decade was characterized by what happened that day, and what Bob Geldof, he was the alarm clock for everybody. Up until then, it was a very different. It was a much more style-centered, that was the early 80s was when designers, photography, much more artistic, glamorous, but the second half of the 80s was like, hold on a second, it was like taking stock, looking around you, it became political, and that day was the hinge.
The AIDS scare. Well, how did that change the perspective of Duran Duran and your life personally?
Well, I was grateful that when we came out, it hadn't arrived. I mean, it really came down. Again, the second half of the decade. I mean, I guess that was another shadow that on the second half of the decade where things changed, and I wasn't really. I never really felt it that deeply, I didn't have. I mean, Nick had friends he lost. It's really been more recently than I've watched documentaries, and I've seen how it, that I've been like, wow, I was a little bit. I was probably so, I'd entered my narcissistic phase, I think by the sort of late 80s, and I wasn't really aware. I was so centered on my own bullshit, I wasn't really aware of who was hurting and in what way they were hurting,
What is the secret of staying sober?
Well, it's a one day at a time program, I mean, everybody's got, there's lots and lots of different ways to do it. I do it by the book, and so far it's been. It's been a fantastic experience. It's been like a rebirth, really. I mean, I never would have seen that coming, never would have seen that on the horizon for me. But that was the, that was how it unfolded.
Would you be brave enough to give other people advice on staying sober?
I think the point of in the book I talk about it, just from the point of view of like, this was my experience.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think most people, certainly most people in my milieu understand that there are options. I mean, we've all got the family member that doesn't know how to turn off. We've all got the family member that drinks too much. We've all got the family member, that is struggling, with maybe, too many pills or whatever, there are options. I mean, if I was to get political about it, when everybody's so obsessed with Medicare in this country, I mean, to me the biggest problem is too many people are on too many medications. Never mind that. I mean, I was lucky to be introduced to a spiritual program that doesn't cost me $1 a day. It's the best deal in town.
So you are a spiritual man now, and you have a higher power.
Yeah, I mean, I think that yes, I would say that. And again, I think that's something that runs throughout the book as well, because the book starts off, and I'm on my way to church with my mother, and my mother was a Catholic-holic. Mm-hmm. She went to church every day, but and she took me along, but I never really got it, But I think at my lowest ebb, in the mid-'80s, I could define that low ebb by being spiritually bereft. And I've gotten back in touch with the spirituality. Don't ask me to describe it. Don't ask me to define it to anybody. But I lead a spiritual life. Not as I mean, I'm not. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a holy Joe. But I try to be mindful.
How would you define the word love?
Well, for me, it's an evolving concept. I suppose it's when you can acknowledge, the importance of someone, and what they, I'm such a self-centered son of a bitch, and that sometimes I forget, that the value of that which is outside of me, but and often it takes moments of profundity for me to appreciate love. I think that it's that we feel it when we're watching that movie, or somebody says something to us, and we kind of like get that feeling. We kind of well up, and we feel close to somebody, and we feel it's a feeling. Love's a feeling, It's but it's very it's good. It's a good thing when it happens, because most of the time we're buzzing around, what can I get? Where's mine? What can I get? How can I get more? It's an acknowledgement of the other.
What's next for you?
Well, I'm going to take a little time off because everybody else has been on the hiatus began for the band. At the end of August, I've been working the book, so I'm looking forward to a little bit of time just to kick around town and make a nuisance of myself, and then we're going to go back into the studio with Mark Ronson next spring in London. So everybody's feeling good about that. I was really glad that I got to write the book at a point in the band's career where we're all where we've had a really good run. We've had a couple of really good years. So there's a very positive sense of the band. You get that very positive sense of the band's dynamic in the book. If I'd have written it at another time, it might have been a more negative portrayal. But it's we've had a couple of good years with All You Need Is Now, and we're looking forward to the next chapter.
John Taylor, you are a wonderful, awesome guy. Thank you so much for your time on the Blairing Out with Eric Blair show.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks.
Blairing Out with Eric Blair show with John Taylor, signing off.
The Blairing Out show.